Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and click the bell icon for notifications so you guys don't miss a single video. And now... Welcome back, dudes and dudettes, to I'm the Dude Games. So this video is going to be about Destiny 2 in its entirety as it existed from its launch all the way up until now, Season of Arrivals in the Shadowkeep expansion. I'm making this video for a couple of reasons. One is to go over briefly my thoughts and opinions on the game in its entirety up from D2 launch all the way up until the current season before the Beyond Light expansion launch next month in November. I'm going to go over my thoughts and opinions on that, and then afterwards I'm going to go over the reasons why I'm quitting playing Destiny for good. I won't be playing the game anymore, and I won't be covering any of its content for this channel, and I will explain why a little later in the video. I'm going to try to keep it as short as I possibly can. So I'm going to refer to my notes that I've written down to try to keep myself on topic as much as possible. So, briefly, I've always enjoyed the Destiny storyline, D1 storylines, from the vanilla all the way up through, Taken King and Rise of Iron. Destiny storylines are great, and Destiny 2 is no exception. I mean, the story and the lore behind it is amazing. It's interesting and very intriguing, and I like it. The way the storytelling is executed in Destiny 2 is another thing entirely. A lot of the story is told through lore tabs and not so much actual gameplay and cutscenes. Like, main story content is driven by cutscenes and actual gameplay and storytelling throughout that gameplay, but a lot of the larger story is told and history is told through lore tabs. And I personally have a problem with that, because when I play a game, I expect most of the story, especially if it's going to be a story centered around, characters and settings that most people are familiar with. Obviously, a lot of the history most people might already know, and for those that don't, then yeah, it makes sense to put in little lore tabs here and there. But I expect most of the story of a game to be fleshed out on screen before me as I'm playing it, not so much like 80% of it in lore and history tabs. I don't like that. I've never liked that. So I don't like the way that that's executed. Destiny 2's vanilla launch story was fantastic. I love the whole, this big bad guy is, Gaul is coming to take, steal the Traveler away from us because he feels he's, the power of the light is rightfully, his, and he's trying to steal it from us. The D2 vanilla launch story is fantastic. I liked it a lot. I liked playing through it. It was really, really fun. The endgame content, largely due to the fact that all armor and weapons in the game at D2 launch in vanilla sucked. And the reason why it sucked is because all armor and weapons had static rolls, not random rolls, which made the grind for gear absolutely pointless. It took the fun out of the game. It's a looter shooter. It's an MMORPG first-person shooter. It's a looter shooter. And you're going to take random rolls off of armor and weapons? That's a bad move. It's a bad move. I barely played D2 vanilla. I have only cleared the Leviathan raid maybe twice, largely due to the fact that I've always had difficulty finding groups of people to play with, even when I'm with a clan. I've run into nothing but problems with that. So I barely played D2. The Curse of Osiris and Warmind expansions, I preferred Warmind over Curse of Osiris. Curse of Osiris's story, I mean, Osiris was supposed to be this legendary character within Destiny, and they fell so short on his character arc. He barely had one. I mean, barely. I never much cared for his personality. It just kind of is what it is. He's really egotistical. And the whole concept of the Vex Infinite Forest only allowed us to go in and do adventure missions and strikes. Imagine this with me, if you will. Because my friends and I came up with this idea while we were playing Destiny. We were talking in chat, and we came up with this idea. I came up with this idea. And they kind of had their own take on it. But I came up with this idea where, because we were talking about it. We were talking about Curse of Osiris, and we were talking about the Infinite Forest. The Infinite Forest, for those of you that don't know, that don't play Destiny, is there's an enemy faction in Destiny called the Vex, and they're biomechanical robots that can essentially control and manipulate the flow of time, and they can time travel. They can't simulate a Guardian's light power, but they run their combat and timeline simulations in what they've constructed as the Infinite Forest. The Infinite Forest is the single largest Vex simulation that the Vex run and control to try to simulate any and all possible outcomes of the future and fights against the Traveler and against the Guardians to try to figure out a future timeline where they can win and dominate all life across the solar system and beyond. So the Infinite Forest would stand to reason that it could have infinite possibilities for an infinite amount of content. That Bungie could have capitalized so much on the Infinite Forest. The idea that I came up with, I'm sorry if I don't look at the camera 100% of the time, but the idea that I came up with was, what if the Infinite Forest, either on a monthly basis or on like a bi-monthly basis, had rotating activities like adventure missions, strikes, but mainly raids. Raids are the end game, even dungeons that Bungie's become more enamored with the idea of dungeons, because dungeons are like mini raids essentially. You don't need as many people to get through them, but they have raid-like mechanics. Dungeons are cool. I'll get to that a little bit later in the video. But I came up with the idea that what if the Infinite Forest on a monthly or a bi-monthly basis had a featured raid? Okay, and you get people going into that raid, trying to learn the mechanics, and once they learn those mechanics, then obviously they can grind out the raid for the gear that they want. Obviously, you have random rolls on the armor and the weapons and everything for that. And maybe like every couple of months, not only have the raid change entirely, like on a monthly or bi-monthly basis, have like first start out with like the first Infinite Forest raid. Okay? And then maybe on a bi-monthly basis, change that raid entirely. Not like make it almost an entirely different raid with new bosses, new mechanics. Maybe Bungie at the time didn't have the right team and resources to try and do something like that. And I don't even know if something like that maybe dawned on them. It might take a lot of resources to try and pull something like that off. But maybe on a monthly or bi-monthly basis, let's say bi-monthly basis, have a bi-monthly featured raid that's different, that changes every time with new encounters, new bosses, new mechanics, and new gear. Keep the players coming back for more. Like, that seemed like a great idea. I mean, does it sound like a great idea? Doesn't it sound like a great idea to you? Would you play that? Because I would. I definitely would. That would give me incentive to want to keep coming back and playing the game. But no. I mean, the very lackluster story for Curse of Osiris. Wasted opportunity with the Infinite Forest. Warmind's story was a little bit more intriguing, but still kind of lackluster story. The Zol, the giant hive worm boss, ultimately forgettable. I mean, they made him a strike boss. They made something that seemed like we were going to have to make it a raid boss, and made it a strike boss, made it way too easy to defeat. And then the best thing that came out of Warmind, I would say, arguably, is the escalation protocol, public event activity. And at the power level that we were capped at for that expansion was arguably pretty challenging. What was funny is that if you got a full fire team of 3, there was a way to kind of get, like, for like multiple fire teams, you could have, essentially you could get like a total of 3 fire teams or 9 people in one lobby on Mars for escalation protocol. And you could kind of do it by somewhat pseudo matchmaking and fast traveling. There was a way to do it. I forget exactly how, but again, still the armor and the weapons from D2 launch all the way up through the first 2 expansions were static rolled. And so even when you got those weapons, they still came with the only perks that they came with that were available. And so it's still, there were only a small handful of weapons and armor that were worth getting. Obviously, exotics are going to have static rolls. That's one thing. Now, obviously, Bungie heard the outcry for random rolls again, so moving on from D2 launch and the first 2 expansions, Bungie came up with the next expansion, Forsaken. Now, Forsaken, considering D2 launch and the first 2 expansions, was a huge, huge step in the right direction. They brought back random rolls. They brought back armor stats. I believe, I don't know if they brought armor mods in with Forsaken. If they did, yeah, they did bring in armor mods, but in somewhat limited capacity. You could really only tweak like your grenade, melee, and class ability stats with certain armor mods, and certain damage enhancing and reducing armor and weapon mods and stuff like that. They did introduce modifiers to weapons and armor in Forsaken, and you could get random rolls on armor and weapons, which was fantastic. The saddest thing, obviously, with Forsaken is they killed off Cade 6, pretty much everyone's favorite character in Destiny and Destiny 2, which is very sad, especially since all throughout Destiny 2 vanilla and expansions, that motherfucker always gave me an exotic drop for completing the weekly Flashpoint public event weekly milestone. Sometimes I even got double exotics. He always gave me the good stuff, and I'm sure the same is true for a lot of other people. Cade 6 was everybody's favorite vendor for that sole purpose that he gave out exotics like it was water. It was amazing. So they killed him off. Which again plays into the whole, as soon as Bungie sees that everybody's having fun with, or too much fun with everything, or something is too overpowered, ooh, nerf, or they just get rid of it. And it just, that system I'll get into that too, a little in a little while here. But so, but again, the story was great. Great revenge story about going and hunting down Uldren Sov and the Scorn Barons, hunting them down and killing them. The story was great. The end game content and the raid was fantastic. I still, to this day, have not gotten 1,000 voices, and due to the fact that I'm not going to be playing Destiny anymore, I never will. So absolutely loved Forsaken launch. There was a bit of a lore cutscene that they introduced into the game. I think before. No, it was after the last season of Forsaken. They gave a cutscene where there was a ghost wandering through the Dreaming City, and it found the spot where the pyre, not pyre, the dais, essentially, where Uldren's body lay in the Dreaming City. And the ghost resurrected him. Which now means that Uldren essentially is a guardian. And I'm interested to see where that story goes. If I want to learn more about Destiny 2's story, then I'll probably just watch some YouTube videos on it. It's not the end of the world, but I'm curious as to what happens with that. It raised so many questions that we still don't have answers to. They reintroduced Mara Sov, Queen of the Awoken. There were so many things they did great. There was so much great story content and things that they did with Forsaken. Season of the Forge and season of the Drifter and Opulence. Great seasons. They all had their high points. They all had their pros and cons. With Season of the Forge, it was interesting to get new content to grind, the forges, the weapons. The raid was very short, very easy to beat, I think, for a lot of people. Not a lot of people's favorite raid in Destiny 2. I feel like they could have done more with like the story of the forges and 801. And I feel like they could have done a better job with like the weapon bounties, the weapon forge bounties from Ada, because they only gave you set weapons and it remained the same from Season of the Forge all the way up until, up until now. They only give you access to the same weapons from Ada, which was the sword, the bow, auto rifle, pulse rifle, machine gun, and sniper. Those are the 6 weapons, and it remained the same. And they could have done a weekly refresh where it just gave you the ability to grind out basically whatever weapons you wanted, but they didn't do that. And there was a big lore piece tied to a hidden puzzle in the Bergusia Forge that was very just lackluster storytelling, and you didn't get anything meaningful loot-wise for completing that little lore tab, essentially. Season of the Drifter introduced, I think, Reckoning and Gambit Prime. Obviously, Bungie was trying to push Gambit, and I personally like Gambit Prime, and I've grown to enjoy it very much. For some reason, regular Gambit just became so much harder to play, not because of Guardians, but not because of the PvP aspect of it, but because of the enemies. For some reason, the enemies in Gambit Prime are way easier to defeat than the enemies in regular Gambit, and I don't know why that is, and it hasn't changed either. But I did enjoy that a little bit of content, but that was about it for that season. Season of Opulence, I think, was very popular on the sole fact that it gave players an activity to grind, focus, and control the kind of loot that they wanted to grind for, whether it be armors or weapons, armor and weapons. Mainly like things like Dust Rock Blues, shotgun and air until, and all that stuff. Gave players the ability to grind for God roll, PvP, and PvE weapons. A lot of people liked Season of Opulence. I liked it. It was great. They reintroduced a lot of exotics too. In those seasons, they brought back the exotic Black Spindle sniper rifle as Whisper of the Worm. They brought also back the Outbreak Prime as Outbreak Perfected. They introduced exotic weapon missions for that you could grind out to get the weapon, then get the catalyst, then upgrade the catalyst all throughout those missions. Those were great content drops, and they were very unexpected. They just dropped one day. Like, people discovered these secrets, and then they went ahead and found out what they could do, and then everyone was like, "Oh my God, do this!" And it was quite a surprise, and it was a welcome surprise. It was welcome content. It really was. All that being said, pretty much gone over the first 2 years of Destiny 2. Now I'm going to move into Shadowkeep. The Shadowkeep expansion and the 3 seasons, actually 4 seasons, I think. Yes, 4. The 4 seasons that we have had in Destiny with Shadowkeep. And here's where it kind of gets weighs more on the negative side than the positive. Season of the Undying, the season that launched with Shadowkeep. First of all, the Shadowkeep story is good. They introduced a lot of new stuff. Story was pretty short. They finally delved more into the pyramid ships and the actual darkness as an enemy. There was a dormant darkness ship on the moon. We've been away from the moon for so long that the Hive have really started to rampant and take over again. And through this enormous underneath the surface of the moon, this giant scarlet keep that's arisen from the surface, it's created a lot of tectonic fissures and opened up an area of the moon where this darkness ship has just been lying dormant inside the moon, and it's giving rise to a lot of these illusions and these specters that are kind of specters of the dead that are kind of just all over the place. It gave rise to a new enemy type, champions. There's Overload Barrier and Unstoppable, which is essentially the darkness's way of bringing forth these special specific type of enemies to try and combat Guardians. And they are an interesting mechanic to add just to throughout the game, throughout story content, nightmare hunts, strikes, raids, etc. Those were interesting. The story, I did enjoy the story. The Pit of Heresy dungeon is fun. With the Season of the Undying, there was a main activity with having to do with the Undying Mind and creating a portal to try and kill all variations, iterations of the Undying Mind to try to put a stop to it for good. That was executed poorly as well, very poorly received from a lot of players. And I mean, there were weapons and stuff that you could grind out by doing that activity, but ultimately more people just wanted to do the raid. They wanted to do the Garden of Salvation raid more than they wanted to do the Undying Mind activity. I forget what it was called even. And there was nothing really special that you got either for completing that by the end of that season. Season of Dawn was very interesting. It was a lot more engaging with players. We brought back Saint 14 from the timeline in the Infinite Forest where he died. For some reason, it was of major importance that we bring back Saint 14 for some reason, and Osiris assisted in that because of the darkness ships arriving. And he's like, there's a huge possibility that we could, 1, bring him back, but 2, we need him to combat the darkness and these pyramid ships, all hands on deck sort of situation. So we brought him back. There was a huge bit of content that dropped with the sundial activity and the obelisks. There was this giant maze lore activity that was introduced into the game that ultimately led to the introduction of a new exotic weapon that is ultimately, I could take it or leave it. It's a meme weapon. You know, the Bastion exotic weapon. There was a whole lore story leading up to, like, this was Saint 14's most prized and most used weapon that he kept on him at all times, used in countless battles, blah, blah, blah. You know, and we all thought it was going to be maybe like an exotic version of Perfect Paradox, but no, it was this kinetic fusion rifle, four-shot like three-shot burst that uses 4 barrels, and at, you know, close-ish range, it could obviously one-shot Guardians. It's used more in PvP than it is in PvE. Ultimately, not that good of an exotic. But everyone, like the entire Destiny community, came together to try and solve all these different maze puzzles, to try and figure out what was the next piece of lore, what's going to be at the end of this. And ultimately, it was just an excuse for people to get an exotic weapon that I could honestly take it or leave it. However, the sundial activity, very, very nice. Liked that a lot. Gave people a way to grind, again, like Season of Opulence, grind for specific gear, mainly weapons that, and rolls on those weapons that they wanted, that they ultimately, you know, could use and enjoy a majority of the time. And ultimately, by the end of Season of Dawn, there was a community goal that was created to, one, sync all of the 4 obelisks on the 4 planets that had obelisks to the tower obelisk, and then use your fractaline materials to power up the tower obelisk. And people discovered that there was a new mission activity looking thing showing up in the PvP tab. In the Crucible tab, there was a new icon that had shown up. And every week, people had donated more fractaline to the tower obelisk to try and infinitely grind for their weapon bounties for the rolls on their Season of Dawn weapons that they wanted. Every week, more and more people donated their fractaline, and every week they saw more progress going around this circle, and a lot of people were speculating that it was going to be the community goal, if they got full progress on this new icon in the PvP tab, that it was going to be the reintroduction of Trials of Osiris. And ultimately, Bungie confirmed that, which also for me raises the question, what if the community didn't reach the goal of donating enough fractaline to make full progress on that little circle? If the community didn't make enough progress, was Bungie just not going to introduce Trials? Like, that begs the question, and we'll never know because they never answered that question, you know? But the community did make full progress on that circle and on that icon, and Bungie reintroduced Trials of Osiris in Season of the Worthy. Now, Season of the Worthy, the Cabal, in a last-ditch effort to try and destroy the Traveler in the Last City, set the Almighty on a collision course to the Traveler in the Last Safe City. And in an attempt to combat this, the story here was Rasputin, the Warmind, opened up all of his bunkers on Moon, Io. It was 4 locations: EDZ, Moon, I believe Io, and EDZ, Moon, Io, and Mars. Yes. No. I don't know. I forget. I'm sorry. Anyway, and there were these Warsat launch public events that were introduced and weekly clearing out of the Warmind bunkers in exchange for loot. Now, the Warsat launch public event was arguably pretty difficult. If you didn't have enough people that actually knew what they were doing, you couldn't make the event heroic and you couldn't complete the event. Ultimately, it was to try to create enough Warsats to launch and essentially blow up the Almighty by the end of the season before it could destroy the city. Cool little bit of story info, but again, it was like with Season of the Undying, it was like endlessly grinding out this activity for next to nothing in return. I mean, yeah, you could grind out weapon bounties and other bounties for loot and stuff like that, but it wasn't as good as Forsaken content. It wasn't as good as Season of Dawn content. It just was a very lackluster bit of content to continually grind, and that was the whole season, with the reintroduction of Trials of Osiris. And with the reintroduction of Trials of Osiris in Season of the Worthy, that was an absolute dumpster fire, and there are still so many things wrong with Trials of Osiris even after Season of the Worthy. The way the token system is set up, it doesn't reward you nearly as many tokens for winning or losing. There is a Trials passage, if you've already gone flawless, that allows people to obtain more Trials tokens per run, per win. But that led to a lot of people just going through getting a token Trials passage, getting 3 wins, and then resetting their card, which then led to a lot of really skilled, like top 10% of Trials players absolutely shitting on lower tier players, lower on like only in the first few wins on their card, which made it insanely difficult. Like, it's difficult enough for a team to go flawless in Trials, and there are people that do it professionally. I'm talking about the more casual players that are trying to go flawless here, like myself, that are going into Trials of Osiris, and they keep getting match made against teams that are obviously way more skilled than they are, and just they're not able to get past it. They're not even able to get to 7 wins, even on a non-flawless card. Even at like 2 wins or 2 losses, like they're not, like, the most wins I've ever gotten to is 5 wins, and that's with at least 1 loss on the card, because it was just so extremely difficult for that reason. And not to mention that no adept weapons, and there's only maybe 2 Trials of Osiris weapons that are even worth grinding for, and that's the Astral Horizon kinetic shotgun, maybe the sniper rifle, the Celerity, I think that's what it's called, whatever, or Eye of Soul, whatever it's called, and then the auto rifle. Those are they're the only 3 weapons that are worth grinding for, but there's no adept weapons like back in D1. And Trials of Osiris in Destiny 2 just flat out blows. And on PC, it's even worse, because you run into cheaters left and right. It makes it even harder to try and go flawless. So all of these issues with Trials of Osiris have led to the problem of pretty much only some of the most top tier professional, like people that do this for a living and are that good at it that they can do it on a consistent basis, on a weekly basis, day in and day out, cranking out flawless cards, largely on PC. Okay, people like iFrostbolt, MTash, ZK Mushroom, fucking Lucky, those people. Okay, even Chibi Robo, he's gone flawless a few times. But those guys are like real, like top tier or near top tier PvP players. Those are the only people that can successfully, even against cheaters, go and get flawless on a consistent basis, because they're that good. Me, I've had my moments in PvP. I've had some pretty damn good moments, and I've had a lot of my worst moments in PvP. Arguably, And if, for those of you that have seen some of my competitive Destiny 2 live streams, you've seen me at my best and you've seen me at my worst, and I apologize for my worst. I really do, because I don't like being that person. I don't. I personally have a lot of anger issues that stem from a past that I won't get into. So when I'm playing a game and I'm trying to accomplish something in said game, and I keep hitting a wall, whatever that wall may be, whether I don't get the roll on a weapon or armor piece that I need, or when it doesn't drop at a power level that I need, when I don't get specifically what I'm after hours upon hours, days, weeks, months, grinding an activity, or I just can't even get past so many wins on a Trials card, or whatever the issue may be, when I keep hitting a wall when I'm trying to accomplish something in a game, it ultimately does nothing but infuriate me, and it makes the game less and less and less and less enjoyable for me. Okay. Trials of Osiris in Destiny 2 is an absolute dumpster fire. It is not worth playing, in my opinion. If you're good at it and you enjoy playing it, not just Trials, but Destiny 2 as in general, good. More power to you. If you enjoy the game, play it. Keep enjoying it. I'm not going to tell you not to. Anything that you enjoy doing, do more of it. If it's enjoyable for you, great. For me, it's not. Not anymore. I have to finish talking about Season of the Arrivals before I finish with my final closing thoughts on Destiny 2 and why I've officially quit playing it for good. I've deleted I could still re-download it, but I keep telling myself not to. I've deleted the application off my PlayStation 4. Excuse me. Season of Arrivals is the current season of Destiny 2. The pyramid ships have finally shown up in the solar system on 4 planets that are officially being deleted / content vaulted by Bungie. They're getting rid of Mars, Mercury, Io, and God dang it, what is it's Mars, Io, Mercury, and Titan. Basically, aside from Nessus, they're getting rid of those 4 main locations from the first year of Destiny 2. The Darkness ships have finally shown up, and they give us a weekly Darkness mission on Io to constantly grind out for a pinnacle drop of gear. Bungie has done a good job of reintroducing more pinnacle drops from more sources to try to really push players to get to the max pinnacle cap before the launch of Beyond Light. That, and they've given players a new activity, which is arguably pretty much just another Gambit Fest. Contact, essentially. The Contact public event is basically where it's kill a bunch of ads, bank a bunch of motes, and kill a final boss. They've introduced a new engram called Umbral engrams, and they're dark versions of regular engrams, and they give players the ability at the tower to decode them at the Drifter's Umbral engram decoder for specific loot, both new and old. Weapons like weapons from the previous seasons, from the previous 4 seasons, that they've reintroduced, that can be infused past the max pinnacle cap of 1060 in future expansions, and I'll get into sunsetting in a minute here. But things like Gnawing Hunger, all the new Season of Arrivals weapons and armor, and other weapons from the previous seasons, gives players really the ultimate infinite way yet again to grind for gear and on rolls on weapons and armor that they specifically want. You can grind out high stat armor. You can grind out rolls on weapons, god rolls on weapons. I think a lot of players have responded very well to ways that they can ultimately grind out god roll armor and weapons that they want to use in PvP activities and endgame activities. And I ultimately did like that. They introduced a new dungeon, which is really, really fun, very trippy and very retro-esque, very fun. That being said about Season of Arrivals, which is the current season and so far the ultimate end of the Shadowkeep expansion, I want to talk about a few things. I'm going to talk about sunsetting and what that is and my thoughts and opinions on it. I'm going to talk about Bungie's whole issue with constantly tweaking and nerfing things into the ground, and giving rise to new metas left and right, and how that's an issue that just needs to be broken in some way, shape, or form. I'm going to talk about my thoughts and opinions on how they reworked strikes, mainly the Master Nightfalls and the Grandmaster Nightfalls, and some issues that lie therein. And also just issues with loot sources, mainly pinnacle loot sources in the game. And then I'm going to get into why I'm quitting Destiny for some of these reasons. Firstly, sunsetting is a thing that Bungie introduced with Season of Arrivals. I'm pretty sure it's Season of Arrivals, where basically anything from Season of Arrivals and Season of the Worthy and Season of Dawn can only be infused up to a certain max power level, making them only so relevant up to a certain point in future Destiny content, in endgame content. Season of Dawn gear can be infused up to 1210 power. Season of Worthy gear can be infused up to 1310, and Season of Arrivals gear can be infused up to, I think, 1360 is what it said. Basically making only Season of Arrivals gear with a little pyramid ship icon on it, both armor and weapons, the ultimate and only truly relevant gear to be used throughout the next year or so of Destiny 2 endgame content. So it's like all the other weapons and gear from anything past that is being made completely irrelevant and unusable. All but unusable. You can use it in not so difficult activities. But if you want to use certain armor pieces from beyond those seasons in endgame activities, you can't, because you can't infuse them past a certain power level, which it makes them completely irrelevant pretty much moving forward. Bungie has had a huge problem for years now. Whenever something becomes too overpowered or whenever there's too much clutter, they just take it away and make it irrelevant, or they nerf it into the ground. And I can't begin to tell you how infuriating and undervalued that makes me feel as a player. I put forth the time and the effort and the infuriation and anger into trying to grind out for these certain weapons, pinnacle weapons, and god rolls on certain weapons that I want, and armor that I want. I put in countless hours and effort into getting these things, only to have them be made not so good or be made completely irrelevant. And that just makes me feel like Bungie doesn't give a rat's ass about the community. They don't care. That doesn't make me feel valued as a player. That makes me feel like you could care less. You're going to make a game that you expect me to pour hours of and years of my life into, and expect me to be okay when you take away my toys, shit all over them, hand them back to me and say, here, continue to use that. Oh, but there's something better over here that you should go for instead of this thing that you spent hours grinding for, weeks. No. No, that shit's not gonna fly. I can only take I can only take so much of this shit before I ultimately just don't enjoy playing your stupid fucking game anymore, Bungie. Don't get me wrong, this video is extremely biased, but it's biased for good reason. That's one of the reasons why I'm quitting playing Destiny for good. They could make the game as the best that it could possibly be. They could improve the loot system, the drop rate of loot in the game. Still have random rolls so people still grind for it, but like incentivize the loot in more activities like Trials of Osiris, and strikes and raids even. There's also an issue with loot drops in the Garden of Salvation raid, which is the only raid in the game that drops pinnacle loot. But the problem with that is, largely, the Garden of Salvation raid only, the loot pool for Garden of Salvation is garbage. Because it largely drops only energy weapons. There are so many energy weapons to be obtained in Garden of Salvation. There's not a heavy weapon in the loot pool. There's only armor, kinetic, and energy weapons in the loot pool for Garden of Salvation. And a majority of the time, for some stupid-ass reason, energy weapons are 90% of the time what drop for people from chests, from boss chests, in Garden of Salvation. And it's infuriating. So that leads to people having to only grind out one pinnacle drop, whether it be armor or weapons, from the dungeons, Pit of Heresy, or the new dungeon I forget the name of, sorry. And then grinding out nightmare hunts, and then master and grandmaster nightfalls for pinnacle gear. And then once a month, 4 pinnacle bounties from Iron Banner. And therein lies another problem with pinnacle drops. Pinnacle drops, the way they work in Destiny 2 right now, is they drop like whatever gear piece you get to drop, whether it be kinetic, energy, or heavy weapon, or any one of the 5 armor pieces, they only drop 2 light levels above your overall potential max power level, what it could potentially be, minus bonus artifact power. Okay. The problem with that is, say and it's completely RNG, but say like my overall max power from all the gear that I have either on one of my characters or in my vault is like 1052. And I have enough to keep me at 1051, but then it only drops me a pinnacle gear piece in a slot where I already have a 1052 piece of gear. And then it keeps doing that on a consistent basis until I get the 1050 and the next gear piece that would essentially raise my power level. Or it only raise it by 1 in that specific slot. That, and they introduced pinnacle gear sources from the weekly playlist activities from Vanguard Strikes, Gambit or Gambit Prime, and the weekly featured PvP playlist, which is usually Control. But in those weekly, playlists, the pinnacle gear that drops from completing 3 strikes with the elemental subclass, or 3 Gambit matches or Gambit Prime matches, or 4 Crucible matches, the pinnacle gear that drops from completing those only drops at 1 additional light level above. I'm sorry, what? Here I was under the impression that when Bungie stated, because originally when they introduced Pinnacle Gear, all Pinnacle Gear drops only dropped at 1 power level above your highest overall power level. So you had to grind out 8 1051 gear pieces to raise your power level 1 past the power cap. So once you got to 1051, then you had to get 8 more gear drops to raise it to 1052, and so on until 1060. Well, they changed that to have it drop at 2 power levels above your highest overall gear score. Okay, I was under the impression that all Pinnacle drops would drop at 2 above, but no. All Pinnacle drops aside from Vanguard Strikes, Gambit, and Crucible drop at 2 above, while Gambit, Strikes, and Crucible drop at 1 above. As soon as I discovered this, and every time I'd grind those activities out, it would only give me 1 Pinnacle level power above my highest overall, but it would give gear to me in a slot that I already had my highest gear piece in. Like if I had a 1052 class item and my overall score was 1052, it would still give me a 1052 class item or whatever gear slot, what have you. It would keep consistently doing that to me no matter what I did on a weekly basis when I'm trying to raise all 3 of my characters to the max Pinnacle cap. I know this is RNG based random number generation. That's the whole point of the grind. But I feel like Bungie should tweak the RNG system enough, just enough, to where a player like me, you know, if they just need 1 or 2 gear pieces to max out their character, that you have a higher chance of getting the gear piece you need instead of consistently week after week after week after week not getting the fucking gear that I need to max out my characters, which is ultimately what I'm trying to do before Beyond Light. But no, it can't even give that to me. It can't even give that to me. The RNG is so unbelievably shitty in the game. Master Nightfalls and Grandmaster Nightfalls. They are some of the most challenging next to some of the raids. The Master and Grandmaster Nightfalls are amongst the most difficult end game activities in Destiny 2. And they are the only activity in the game that rewards masterworking materials like enhancement cores, shards, and ascendant shards. Masterworking materials that people need to masterwork their armor. My brain is fried from talking about all this crap. Master and Grandmaster Nightfalls are the only activity in the game that reward masterwork materials, and Grandmaster Nightfalls are the most rewarding in that regard for masterwork materials and loot. But the difficulty level for what you're being rewarded is largely not worth it. Like, you need to introduce more sources for masterwork materials in the game, because then your only other option is to grind out so many enhancement cores to then buy enough enhancement prisms from Banshee to therefore buy more ascendant shards from Banshee, and the max amount of ascendant enhancement prisms you can hold is 50, and the max amount of ascendant shards you can hold is 10. Which is really bogus, I think. So you're going to make this one of the most difficult, if not the most difficult activity in the game, and you're going to make it the only source for masterworking materials in the game, aside from the gunsmith vendor. again, yet another problem with loot sourcing in the game. It's poorly executed. It really, really is. Um, all of these things, from the lack of necessary gear drops, the lack of necessary beneficial gear drops that would boost my characters to the max, and sources of loot, and how difficult certain activities are, and how lackluster the loot is, and how often Bungie just keeps getting rid of something or nerfing it into the ground only to give rise to a new power, like, tweaking. Right now, currently, auto rifles are like the new meta, and, shotguns are still shotguns, and fusion rifles are actually still pretty good, even though they nerfed those a little bit. But Bungie has a huge problem with the way that they handle their sandbox. They have for years. And it's ultimately taken the joy, it's taken the enjoyment out of wanting to even grind for these weapons, because I grinded myself, and with, a few friends here and there, right before Forsaken launch, I think. No, right before Shadowkeep launch. It was one of the two. I was grinding out Luna's Howl, the exotic, or the pinnacle hand cannon from Forsaken, and one of the quest steps, in fact, one of the most difficult of those quest steps, was to get to Fabled Glory rank in the competitive PvP playlist. That was infuriating, but I did it. I managed to do it, and mere weeks before it was going to get nerfed to a 150 round per minute hand cannon, because at the time Luna's Howl and Not Forgotten were 180 RPM hand cannons. They are still consistent 3-tappers in PvP, but grinding out those weapons, and I grinded out my Not Forgotten on stream post nerf too. I put hours and hours and hours into grinding for these weapons that ultimately were just going to be made damn near obsolete and irrelevant. Again, it makes me feel so undervalued as a player when Bungie's just like, oh, we're going to make this crappy over here, but we're going to make this other weapon over here that takes next to no skill to use more powerful over here. We're going to make you play the game the way we want you to play it, not the way you want to play it. Here's how the video game industry, here's how developers make games. Okay, they make the game, they try to find a balance between what they think players will ultimately enjoy. They try to create enough content in the game that they think players will enjoy, and also try to mix it with the kind of game that they want to make artistically. And they try to combine the two. And ultimately it's hit or miss. But people play these games because ultimately they look interesting enough for them to spend money on. To then get the game, play it, experience it for themselves, and then decide whether or not it was worth it. Okay? You forcing your community to try and play the game based on how you want them to play it is not how it should go. It really isn't. I said it earlier. I personally have my own problems and my own anger issues that I'm constantly battling. But when I feel like I am so undervalued as a player, when I've spent years of my life dedicated to this game, and time after time, I just keep running into nothing but problems and walls playing the game. I've gotten kicked out of so many clans because of my rage, my video game raging, and my anger issues, which I don't like because I largely when I play video games, I enjoy playing them and I try to rise to the challenge and I try not to rage so much. When I'm legitimately enjoying a video game and I'm enjoying playing it, I'm cool, man. Like my rage is like way down below. And I usually don't have any problems. If something's giving me difficulty, I get a little angry. Yeah, but I ultimately overcome it and then I feel better because I've accomplished that, you know? That's what a video game is supposed to be. It's supposed to be challenging, but not so challenging to the point where you just can't. You just can't. To where it's nearly impossible to even get past a certain point or succeed. And the way things currently exist in Destiny 2, for me anyway, I've just gotten to a point where every single time I play the game is just the most tedious, life-sucking grind that is just ultimately the most unenjoyable thing. Every time I play the game, I can't get any enjoyment out of it. I've gotten to the point where I just can't enjoy the game. And that's not good. That's not fun. It's really sad. Because I've spent years of my life, 5 to 6 years now, playing this game, dedicated to it, and this is how it's repaid me, with nothing but aggravation and disappointment. And this is how it's rewarded me. And I'm done. I'm at the end of my rope. I can't do it anymore, guys. I just can't. So again, whoever's watching this video, if you've never played Destiny before and you want to try it, give it a shot. It's up to you. If you're someone who legitimately enjoys playing the game and enjoys it to whatever extent, I'm not going to stop you. I'm not going to tell you not to keep playing it, not to try to keep enjoying it. Go for it. Because that's ultimately why you should be playing these things in the first place, is to try to enjoy it. So, but those are the main reasons why I just thoroughly do not enjoy Destiny anymore. And even if after the Beyond Light expansion, if the game ultimately just becomes as good as it could possibly be, if all of these problems that I've expressed in this video somehow get fixed in some way, shape, or form, and the game achieves the pinnacle of the best that it could possibly be, that's all well and good. But for me, up until this point, the game has been ultimately soiled and tarnished so much to the point where even if the game becomes the best it could possibly be and everybody's playing it, it's still not enough to make me come back to it. Because it's gotten to the point with me where I just, no matter what the game has, no matter how good it could possibly be, I cannot bring myself to play it and enjoy it the way I used to, and I never will be able to again. Bungie, this is what, and I mean, it's partially my fault too for playing the game for so long, but Bungie, you are also responsible for the way the experiences that I've had playing your game and for the way I now feel about your game. You have ultimately lost a Destiny player for good. And in the grand scheme of things, you probably won't give a rat's ass about a small-time 200-plus sub YouTuber quitting your game. At the time of this video, this will come out after, at the end of my Final Fantasy VII Remake series, after I upload my review of that game. And it'll come out after that. It'll upload after that, and before my Marvel's Avengers campaign playthrough with my fiance. So that's ultimately enjoyable, and I definitely have my own thoughts and opinions on Marvel's Avengers compared to Destiny, because Marvel's Avengers is very similar to Destiny's in a lot of ways. It's a looter type game. It has its similarities to Destiny and it has its differences. But ultimately, I'm enjoying in Marvel's Avengers similarities to Destiny 2. I'm enjoying it a lot more than Destiny for a lot of reasons, and I'll get into those reasons in later videos. But for now, that's going to do it for this video, guys. Those are my thoughts and opinions overall on Destiny 2 from launch all the way up until Season of Arrivals before the Beyond Light expansion. And those are the reasons why I'm officially quitting Destiny 2, and I will no longer be playing the game in any capacity, and I will no longer be covering any Destiny content on this channel. I'm sorry to say that, but at least you guys know. At least I've explained myself well enough. So, in the meantime, guys, that's it for this video. I hope you all enjoy my content, and my name is I'm the Dude 5, and this is I'm the Dude Games. So if you enjoy my content, please subscribe to my channel and click the bell icon for notifications. You have no idea how much it helps support the channel, and ultimately I'm putting this content out there for all of you people, lovely people, to enjoy. Like this video as well as any others of mine that you enjoy, and be sure to follow me on Twitter. As always, I'll give that link in the description so you can stay up to date on any and all channel news. Stay classy. I'll see you all out there in the next video.